This is a production of Cornell University.
First, just let me say it's no accident that I'm following Victor. You know, we have the same interests on emergence. We have the same networks is basically the solution. We basically are committed, both of us, to multi-method sort of approaches to networks. And he's, rooted in one field and now branching out. I didn't even know about New York. And I'm also rooted in one field, Renaissance Florence, sort of branching out. So we have a lot of things in common and hopefully a lot of mutual admiration. I'm not actually going to talk about Renaissance Florence. I'm sort of tired of talking about it, I guess. You go read. I have plenty printed about the subject. I'm going to basically be focusing on what I think is the general themes in this sort of book that Woody and I wrote. But I can't help saying one thing in response to Victor about Renaissance Florence. He emphasized the role of reputation, the role of gossip, the role of this sort of thing, and your capital was your name and this sort of thing. Cosimo de' Medici's bank, and actually he had a brother named Lorenzo, not the famous one, but another sort of Lorenzo brother. It was the biggest bank in Europe, not just Florence, in entire Europe, and how much investment, in the sense of corpo, how much of his own cash he put into this. Not because he didn't have it. So if you want to measure leverage, indebtedness divided by, capital, it's a leverage of infinity because its denominator is zero. And the reason, of course, is what Victor is talking about. He had a name. He had connections. He could get into trouble and he could snap his fingers and money would pour down upon him, which he could then use and he could do. So, Renaissance Florence looks a lot like China, actually. And there's no state there. I mean, of course, you could talk about a state, but really, it's really light on the ground in terms of its influence. So I'll just throw that out. That I agree with Francesca. The word universal makes me nervous too. But similarity, you go along with similarity. There's some similarities, between Renaissance Florence and China and these sort of places. Okay, so what I want to talk about instead is the sort of the overall book that Woody and I wrote, and this is what the book looks like. It looks better color than that. But the reason I put the picture up.
The side view is more impressive.
Huh? Yeah.
I said the side view is more impressive.
Yeah, very, very big book, long book, heavy book. But the reason I put this slide up, this is the real color of the book, or blue-green, is this, this looks like, maybe it's just a bunch of rocks, maybe it's a modern abstract painting or something, but what it really is the origins of life on Earth. That's the oldest fossil that exists in the history. It's called stromatolites. It's basically bacterial colonies, and bacterial colonies completely surrounded the ocean, lived in the ocean, and were all over. They were so massive that they're what created the oxygen in the atmosphere. And so forth. So this is a huge thing. Now, the reason I mention this is the following factoid, which got me into this whole project in the first place, which is that the Earth is, look up the details on my paper, but the Earth is 4.9 or 4.5 billion years old. And these fossils are, I think, 3.9 billion years old. And the first billion years, the Earth didn't even have water. It was just bubbling lava and so forth. And so the point is, basically, as soon as the Earth cooled off enough for there to be water, there was life. Like immediate. If you think life was this sort of gradual flipping of coins, this is emergence, the biggest emergence ever. Just almost instantaneous. I like to say, well, the creationists might have their explanation wrong, but they got their facts right. On the seventh day, boom, it was done, and that's it. It's just clear. So life emerged immediately, basically. And this is a puzzle that I'm going to use as a sort of a metaphor, of course, for all sorts of transformations. All sorts of transformations are pretty sudden and pretty quick and spread pretty fast. And they all have this sort of property that Duncan was pointing to, that they usually are hardly ever created for the reasons that they turn into being used. You know, that something's happening, then all of a sudden, whoosh, you know, and this is a typical profile of all the cases I look at. Almost never are these life-changing, organizational-changing things I'm described intended. After the fact, they're intended, you know, but at the origins, and I don't mean they were, people are non-purposeful agents. I just mean people have purposes here, and then their effects are over here. And then this is what takes off. That's what I mean. Just like what Duncan sort of described. That's going to be a typical trope in what I say. Content of the books, obviously I'm not going to go through this, but there's a section on autocatalysis, which is this the model that people have come up with about this formation of the stromatolites. This is the scientific answer for why life sort of emerged so quickly, and I have models in here. There's the history side of me, which is, of course, Florence and Italy, but early capitalism, state formation, the emergence of international banking, this partnership system thing that I mentioned with Francesca in Renaissance Florence and Italy, the emergence of a stock market in early modern Amsterdam, the consolidation of Germany under Bismarck out of all of these provinces, the topic that actually a little earlier than, but the topic that Victor was talking about, the politics of economic reform in the Soviet Union and China. This is my part of the book. And then other people have done various other aspects of the communist transition, and my co-author Woody Powell is mainly doing all this stuff about Silicon Valley and biotechnology. It's a ridiculous array of topics from the origin of life to Silicon Valley. But you know what links them is these are all cases I claim of the emergence of novelty, the emergence of a new form of life. You know, and what I mean by a new form of life is a novel organizational form that didn't exist before, like the stock market. You know, I emphasize novelty, 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 novelty. You know, now I'm aware, you know, this historian's, Francesca's friend and mine, Richard Goldthwait, no, nothing's ever novel, Oh, what about this, what about this, what about this? You know, endless. You can look on my webpage, 60 single-page correspondence with me and Richard about the definition of novelty, you know, and it's hardly ever that there was no precedent. There's no such thing as virgin birth. But what it is new combinations, things that have a history individually, but they were put together in a new way that then become, you know, reinforcing as positive growth sort of kicks in. So I don't mean novelty in the sense of out of nowhere. I just mean new combinations that really sort of exploded. So that's basically what I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to talk about this idea of the origin of life and how that can be operationalized, implemented, how you can think about it on these more social emergence questions like the type of thing that Victor just talked about. Okay, so I'm just sort of a general theoretical overview. And then if you want to ask me about cases, of course, I could talk endlessly about cases. What are the goals of the book? The main thing, it's trying to do two things. Understand processes of novelty, especially organizational novelty, the creation of new types of organizational forms. But that's, in a way, just a subset of what I really care about, which is the emergence of actors, you know, both at the individual level and at the organizational level. And I'll come back and say this sort of question. And then I'm also going to say something about evolution from a different point of view. So let me say first a point about this, and then a point about this, just at the goal level. Novelty, I just want to submit, is a hard problem. First of all, Darwin wrote a book called The Origins of Species. Changed the very famous book. You've heard of it. But of course, he never explained the origin of species. He explained natural selection, given that they originated. He didn't actually answer his sort of topic. The whole question of speciation was not really settled in the Darwin case, even though that was his goal, that was his sort of purpose. So it's a hard sort of question, and it's also hard for another reason, that in the social sciences, the word novelty, it's not novel if people knew about it ahead of time. So by definition, people have a certain awareness or consciousness, and novelty, to be true novelty, is something that's out here that people have not had experience of. So, the whole approach of consciousness is really not actually very helpful, because in fact this is something that's happening outside. They're thinking, it's not that they're blind, they're thinking this, but then this happens, and this is the emergence, not this. So it's a hard problem. And it's a hard problem also because, a dominant approach in social sciences, as has been made clear all afternoon, is methodological individualism. And methodological individualism, of course, proceeds from a premise. The axioms are individuals are the basic foundation, and then from individuals, then we derive consequences, and Coleman's boat, which you put up, was down, over, up, but all of the action that in the methodological individual tradition is this up part. There's never much focus on the down part, about correct construction of the actors individually. Not that that's not important, but they emerge off stage from the theory. Let there be the following set of preferences, let there be the following set of this. Then we can do magic about collective action and so forth. But the basic axioms come off stage. So if you want to complete the Coleman boat of trying to derive where actors come from, you're confronted with this novelty question, in which I would say we don't really have many tools. That's why I'm going to wind up turning to biochemistry, because that's where a lot of work has been done. The question of speciation, a lot of work has been done since Darwin on this type of question. So all I'm trying to say is this is an issue. Now, if you ask, well, how do you proceed? Well, I was, again, a second metaphor. I like metaphors, actually, but if I proceed by just thinking about me. I'm here, John Padgett, and I look like I have preferences, for sure. I have resources, not as much as I want, but something. I have a definite worldview. I have a lot of features, which there's no problem that I'm a methodological individual. But if you look at me like a chemist would look at me, you get a very different flavor. Who am I? I'm stuff coming in, and I'm stuff going around, I'm stuff going out. Next day there's more coming in, stuff going around. This process of I like to say, look at your nose. Do you realize that your nose wasn't there 2 years ago? That is to say, there isn't a single atom or single cell that was there 2 years ago. Why? Because it's all died, and it's been flushed, and it's been reconstructed. So the whole process of us stability through time is this reproductive process of chemicals. I'm a chemical reaction network that reproduces itself through time with inputs and outputs. I'm not as solid as I look. I'm just a little vortex, that's eventually going to run out of gas. And this is who I am as a chemist. And so I'm saying, well, we should think about our social structure this way. We should think about social structure not as Cornell University or something, but no, people are coming in, people are interacting, people are going through, and there's something about Cornell that sort of persists through time, but actually it's all flux at the micro level, and so the question is, what is the mechanism of flux and reproduction that keeps me or the Cornell University or any of the things going through time? I think this is going to be the micro foundations of understanding emergence. You have to get rid of the word object, solid object, and talk about flows, reproductive flows. Now, before I get carried away with this, I'm always want to say the most important sentence that's quoted in our book, which I agree is important. We say, Woody and I say, in the short run, actors make relations. That's methodological individualism, if you didn't get it. But in the long run, relations make actors. So the conflict between methodological individualism and social constructivism is really a question of time scale. It's a question of intercalating time scale. In the short run, given that I am who I am, you don't need to worry about where I came from. But if you are concerned about longer time scales, well then, actually my mother was rather important, and Harrison White was sort of important, and all these things, all these relationships that I have gone through have made me through time. So if you add that to your time scale, then this second half, in the long run, relations create actors, becomes very important. I think each of these two sides are equally important. It's just that social science spends all of its time on the first half. It doesn't spend any of its time on the second half. And that's basically what I'm trying to bring to the table with this autocatalysis sort of point of view. The second point about is evolution. This is something I learned down with friends Walter Fontana that I cited earlier in the day. Evolution really isn't really, they're not really at the, population genetics is still important, but, that's not where the action is in evolutionary theory anymore. Population genetics, if you don't realize, there is a set of genes which are selected. It's a marriage of Darwin and Mendel. So you have natural selection up here, you have a pile of genes over here. The modern synthesis, so-called, namely population genetics, is all about how this selection affects the distribution population of the genes. This is sort of standard evolutionary type of theory, but that's not really where the action is. And why? Because there's this middle level called the phenotype, not the genotype, but the phenotype, the actual critter, that's sort of carrying these through. That level has been eliminated in the modern synthesis. And today, I would say there's a new school called Evo-Devo, which is all about how you get from genes to phenotype, the process of development, evolutionary development. Development refers to phenotypical development, to turning these genes into a sort of thing. And why do I digress like that? I digress like that because it's all about networks. That's why. It's all about networks. It's not about Evo-Devo. It's not all about distributions of genes. It's about the interaction, the sequencing, the regulation, turning on and off the expression of genes through time. That's how noses happen and all of this sort of stuff. So, I'll get another factoid. Nobody guessed that the number of genes in the Human Genome Project was as low as it was. There was a pool of biologists. What's the number going to turn out? It turned out to be 20,000 or so, 22,000. That's lower than any biologist predicted. Lowest. I mean, we don't have any more genes than Drosophila. Now they have about maybe a few more genes, but basically not many more genes than Drosophila. It doesn't mean our chromosome is much bigger, but the number of genes in it's not any bigger. Why is it so much bigger? Well, it's all about regulation. It's all about communication. It's all about networks. How does this gene turn on and off these types of networks? That's the process of development, is a process of development of the networks among a relatively fixed sort of number of genes. That's Evo-Devo. If you see that, then I think, well, us social scientists are in that same game. We can definitely talk about the evolution of networks. We can try to. We can talk about these sorts of things. We are part of reconceptualizing evolutionary theory away from population genetics towards sort of Evo-Devo. So I'm in alliance with a lot of people in biology, and now I have a new Social Science Research Council program, History, Networks, and Evolution, which is supposed to institutionalize this alliance with biologists and social scientists. Okay, so that's the big picture. How do you go about implementing this big picture? Well, here are my two axioms. I said, well, methodological individualism has the axiom of actors, and that's bad if you want to study emergence. On the other hand, every theory has axioms. It's not like I don't have axioms, I have, so, these are my axioms: autocatalysis and multiple networks. Santa Fe Institute, Harrison White. So my talk is just basically to explain those two mechanisms, or maybe mechanism. I like the word mechanism, but it's a little bit too engineering for Francesca. Maybe processes, two processes that go through time that will answer, I claim, the question of novelty and emergence. Okay, this is my claim. You can get it out of these two. You have to have both, though. One alone is not enough. You have to have both to get novelty at the end of the day. So what is autocatalysis? Autocatalysis is an idea that basically was formalized by Eigen and Schuster, Austrian and Germans, and Eigen got the Nobel Prize in 1977, so this is not cutting-edge stuff. It's stuff that's well recognized in the past, But it's basically, to oversimplify, and I make it more complicated in my chapter 2, but to oversimplify, this is the chemical definition of life. Set of nodes and transformations in which all nodes are constructed by transformations in the set. Now that seems, what the hell is he talking about? Well, to talk about chemistry. A set of chemicals and chemical transformations, or chemical reactions. A set of chemicals and chemical reactions in which all chemicals are constructed by chemical relations among chemicals in the set. So you have a set of chemicals, but they are produced internally. This chemical relates with this chemical, which turns into this chemical, which is chemical, but eventually you come back to the beginning and reconstruct the the relationship. So it's basically a positive feedback loop. It's a positive feedback loop, which every node is the recipient of a positive feedback. So why did the origin of life happen so quickly? Well, it happened so quickly because of autocatalysis. Namely, you throw in a bunch of chemicals and then nothing happens. Blip, 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 linear, blip, linear, blip, linear, blip. You get cycles though. This thing sort of emerges like this. So these positive feedback loops of construction are really the secret. They're the basic material of which life is involved. Now there are other things called inheritance and so forth, which genetics, the other things come down the road. But at the beginning of the story, it's really all about autocatalysis. So I just mentioned that. And like I said, that's not my idea. That's Eigen and Schuster. But what Woody and I do is we say, hey, that works for social systems. Nobody thinks it. Why not? What is an economy? Well, economy is a set of products and production rules, like technological things, in which all the products are constructed by production rules that relate products in the set. You take this product, you turn it into that product. It's like thinking of an economy like an ecology. Take this, add this, turn it into a car. Take this, add this, turn it into this. And the point of view is if it's cyclical, if it's just linear, then that's not self-reproducing. You make cars, but you don't keep the whole economy going. You have to have the cycles. And what's the cycle? Well, you say, well, oil, we didn't make oil. Yeah, but we made the machinery that got the oil out of the system. So there's always this sort of constant process of generating inputs into you to keep yourself sort of going. So an economy is a living system. Not usually thought of that. It's usually thought of a price-generating market. But if you think of it as an ecology, the economy is a living form. If this is the definition of life, then it is, Okay, well, social networks are like that. People, I just gave the example. Here I am because of a concatenation of social relationships through time. If you take a long enough time perspective, well, where did my mother come from? Where did she come from? Where did blah, blah, blah. They're all sort of reproducing itself through time. So a set of people and social relations in which the people are constructed over time, of course, through social relations among people in the set. So a social network is actually a living form, if you think of it in this dynamic over time sort of way, rather than just a snapshot sort of cross-section. And even language, and I'm doing my work on this, language is a set of symbols, or let's say words, in conversations in which words are constructed by conversations among words in the set. Forget about the fact that we're human beings, just look at the language itself. It's a set of semantic transformations and so forth. So basically, I'm saying that's a powerful idea, autocatalysis. Can we do anything with it? I mean, it's powerful. It's really talking about, and for example, why is it powerful? It's powerful, one, because it explains how you can get continuity through time in the face of continual turnover of its parts. The parts in autocatalytic systems are coming and going, utter flux, yet the pattern sort of persists through time. So it explains stability, if you will. It also explains repair. We injure ourselves and we get a bruise in the body, and you just, without going to the doctor, it'll heal itself. Why? Because we're an autocatalytic system. Damage will be, you take away a chunk of handful of nodes from an autocatalytic network, and the rest of the network will busily reconstruct the missing pieces so it has tremendous repair sort of qualities. That's why it's a sort of a powerful idea, just like human systems might also have this. So I got really interested in this idea of autocatalysis. Just a couple of points. I already mentioned these metaphors down here, but it requires a little bit of a twist in your understanding of what a network is. A twist that's good, actually, but a network in this view is not a pipe. It's not just transmitting bits. It's a sequence of transformations. Like a chemical reaction network is a network in the sense of A causes B causes C. It's not that A is passed through 3 nodes. It's a transformation network, not a pipes-oriented network. And I'm not opposed to the diffusion pipes-oriented view. That's very useful for different purposes. But for the questions of emergence, I think this transformational view of what a network is more powerful foundation. And we could, Leontief measured this sort of stuff for the economy. It's not like it can't be done. People done it a long time ago. There are 3 types of autocatalysis in the book. Maybe I don't go too much into this because I just mentioned it. There are 3 types of autocatalysis in the book. Production autocatalysis, which is all about the reproduction of material products, physical computers, things of this sort of in an ecology. There's us, the part we care about, that's what I call production autocatalysis. Biographical autocatalysis is this part about constructing who we are, and linguistic autocatalysis is all about language. And the topic of culture came up and so forth. This is not all of the culture, but this is what I mean by culture, basically the reconstruction of language sort of through semantic networks, Paul MacLean stuff, that's linguistic autocatalysis. So that's half. That explains life, or the origins of life. That explains stability. That explains repair. But it doesn't answer by itself Darwin's question either about the origin of species, because I don't really have novelty here. A good autocatalytic system will just keep going till it runs out of gas. It won't emerge. It won't switch to some other autocatalysis. So that's why this second part is actually equally important. You need multiple networks to really close the loop and generate novelty out of autocatalysis. And maybe before going into this, I'll just explain. Yeah, there we go. There's multiple networks. This is how a network analyst like me and Victor see the world. You see China is just China. Except so there's economic networks. There's an economic sphere, or you could call it a field, or you could call it a domain, or whatever you want to call it. But there's an economic area in which there are firms. What's a firm? It's a partnership, maybe a relationship, partnership that's formed between the people. They do business. What's business? A dotted line. They do trading products to other companies, and they have a legal status, a name. Okay, so that's production autocatalysis, biographical autocatalysis, linguistic autocatalysis. So the 3 types of autocatalyses go together to comprise the economic domain. But of course, China is not in Florence. They're not just the market. They're also family systems, But family systems could be understood in exactly this way with exactly the same autocatalysis theoretical foundations. You could have a family if this is, I'm going to use male-female language because, I'm in a patrilineage society. The families are defined by male descent, not by female. So a family would be, here's a father, grandfather, father, 2 sons. That could be a family in the sense like a partnership. But they trade with other families. What's trade called? Trade's called wives. They're shipping wives from one sort of family to another. And they got legitimacy. They got a name. Of course, notice here, this has no name. There are a lot of people that are sleeping around producing babies, but they're not the Padgett family, because they're just illegitimate. But they're still part of the network, so they have no circle. So there's this is also, the family sphere is also a composition of production autocatalysis, biographical autocatalysis, linguistic and political. There's a political alliance. Dotted lines are deals. I have no circles down there because political organizations are utterly illegal in Florence. It's a conspiracy, it's a faction, and so forth. So there's tremendous non-recognition of their legitimacy of opposition and so forth. But if you had a modern day sector, you could draw circles, which means the legitimacy. So this is just a way of putting what I'm talking about into a format that you can see how this relates to data, and indeed, in my data set, this is a relational database. I have 120 tables, and I've connected it all by IDs. And what's an ID? ID is a statement that this politician is the same as this father, is the same as this businessman. So, vertical lines are the composition of roles, which are people. Okay? And so, I won't go into it, but if, big data, well, I'm not so big, but 60,000 people, 1,700 family genealogies, and marriage data, political data, economic data, you can all put it into an Access or SQL or something sort of database and link it up in a way that's just precise. This is not a metaphor, it precisely is the way it is linked up in the database. So what do I want to do? So all I've done now is I've just defined autocatalysis. I've moved to multiple networks, saying, okay, actually there's quite a few of these it's not just one network, it's actually quite a few of these things that are layered on top of each other, linked by the fact that people go by different rules. And I'll throw in a little jab, and maybe I'll get resistance on this point, and that's fine. But I like to think of goals not as attached to people, but as attached to roles. What do I mean by that? Well, like here's Cosimo de' Medici as a banker. Here's Cosimo de' Medici as a father. Here's Cosimo de' Medici as a politician. Is Cosimo de' Medici a purposive actor? You're damn right. But on the other hand, what are his goals? Well, he's interested in profit up here, and he's maybe interested in status down here. Maybe he's interested in power down here. There are different goals associated with different roles. So the idea of profit is not a feature of Cosimo, it's a feature of Cosimo as banker. Are they consistent? Can you draw a utility function that puts it all together? Well, that just sort of depends upon how contradictory these things are. If they're all rank ordered in the same way, then of course you can write a meta equation and act as if you're doing a global maximization. But if they're actually contradictory, and they're doing one thing this way and another thing this way and another thing this way, you can easily generate cycles of behavior, cycles of things which, of course, violate the von Neumann-Morgenstern axioms. So you can't even draw a utility function in that particular case. So the whole idea of methodological individualism in the sense of maximizing a utility function is gone. If you have contradiction among these things, because then you got cycles and no consistent curve to draw. So that's a sort of a footnote. I could get argument, that's fine. So this is the setup. The question is, how do you get from this to novelty? The goal is novelty, Autocatalysis is tool number one. Multiple networks is tool number two. How do you get the payoff, which is novelty? Well, let me explain this distinction we make between innovation and invention. That'll be step one, halfway to an answer, but not the full answer. We define innovation as basically, I shouldn't say we define, we see in our cases, inductively, innovation as sort of vertical movements on this thing. Cosimo's bank in trouble. What am I going to do? Well, what he's going to do is going to search through this network space to find new ideas. This is totally like what Ron Burt would have said. What does he look? He looks to see how he behaves as a father. Well, let me try to run my bank as a family. That's an idea, may or may not work, but it's an idea. Let me try to run my firm as a patron-client network. Or maybe I can run my idea as my brother's patron-client network, Basically search through the space, one step, two steps, three steps, and find. So this network from an idea generation point of view is what sometimes called the topology of the possible, the set of ideas that are available to you in considering changes, and we see in our systems, in our cases, people doing this all the time. So it's not like there's some brand new moment where all innovation. No, people are constantly moving ideas up and down this thing. New ideas are a dime a dozen. They're happening all the time. Experiments, it's not random experiments. It's directed experiments by this structure. But it's happening constantly. It's like a quantum flux almost. So where do you get real change, innovation? Well, real change, innovation, invention, is when it's not just a new idea for your bank, but that thing percolates and reorganizes the whole autocatalytic system in which you're in. So it jumps from here to here and here and here and here, and all of a sudden you've got a new diagram, a new network diagram, which has changed the autocatalytic network. So innovation is changing the node. Invention is changing the network in which the node is being reproduced. You know, it's not just changing a new widget, it's creating a new industry of ecology of this sort of thing. So the whole question about this thing is the percolation. You know, how vulnerable are systems to being perturbed, being reorganized, and how do things percolate around once some new idea sort of comes along. So that's stage one. Stage two is, we have, I think, 8 mechanisms that our cases have uncovered. You know, I won't have time to do it, but things called transposition and refunctionality, things called anchoring diversity, things called, I can't even remember them, purge and mobilization, my old friend robust action, multivocality, and then there's a variety of mechanisms that we have inductively found in our cases, which really show where this sort of tipping thing comes from. And all these mechanisms, which I'm just waving my hands, please read the book, all have to do with not just this micro stuff, not just this micro percolation, but, you know, sort of macro things which take a hunk of this network and shove it down into this hunk of this network. You know, like transposition refunctionality, for example, is when, you know, there was a whole set of guildsmen who ran business a certain way, and they, because of the Chompy Revolt, which is a political event having nothing to do with economics, they were yanked up into the city council and became politicized. Then they were shoved out to London. You know, this is not anything that they did. It wasn't these people at Meetup. It was some macro, you know, revolution that sort of moved chunks of the network around from one place to another. And so, it's this cross-network rewiring, if you want to call it that. You know, that is, in every case we have. You know, so the partnership system, this great economic invention, was an unintended consequence of the Chompy Revolt. What's the Chompy Revolt? Well, it's just Marxist world guys running around burning houses. So the Marxist revolt led to the economic innovation, sort of a bigger version of what you were talking about, you know, this sort of thing. But what's really going on there is a chunk of this going into a chunk of that, which then percolates in a way. You know, you've got a new set of nodes, and if nothing happened, if it were just the old system reproducing itself, that happens a lot. It just means a failed effort to do invention. You know, but if the new nodes get incorporated in some way into the old nodes and cause a switching, a tipping of networks, then that's. And so, read the book. There are a lot of cases about this sort of thing, but every case, from Mao to Stalin to Bismarck, is interpreted in our analysis of Silicon Valley in this sort of mode. You know, there's autocatalysis. Actually, that's a complicated overlay of a lot of different autocatalyses. You know, they layer on top of each other. The real action in explaining novelty is looking at cross-domain mappings, not just economics, or not just politics, or not just kinship, but how do they sort of win through each other, through in a micro way or in a macro sort of type of way. Okay. I start with you.
Well, I mean, I've come across this work. I really liked it. We read it.
Past tense?
No. I really liked it. No, I read it, last year. But let's see. First and foremost, in your move from the physical world metaphors to the social world, and that's what you and Woody are mainly interested in, right? There seems to be. Let me ask you: are you using this as a? It's not a heuristic device. It's not a metaphor. It's not a identification exercise. But it's actually somewhat of it. I mean, it's a full-blown causal argument, right? It's a model that causally explains the rise of innovations and novelty. So one could theoretically, you do it nicely in particular chapters, use historical cases to exemplify it. But one could use current day methods, quantitative methods, to somehow capture this, and that's what you're going to say is as a causal argument, yes. Right?
Yes, I mean, of course, it is a metaphor, and of course, it is an inspiration. It's all of the above list of things, right. But including that list, yes, is a predictive causal argument. But I have to say that what is prediction? I think there's a huge difference between a physicist's notion of prediction and a biologist's notion of prediction. Physicists want point equilibrium typically, or if you're sophisticated like Peyton, you want to predict the whole distribution. That's not a point equilibrium anymore. That's something fancier. But just to be, you want a thing that's boom. That's a biologist. On the other hand, I always go back to Darwin. Darwin was not Spencer. Darwin was not a teleologist. That the whole purpose of evolution is to create the end product, right? Me, that was not sort of Darwin. Darwin used to draw pictures of a branching bush. This leads to this leads to this. All his notebooks are full of this branching bush sort of framework. And he basically wants to, Darwin would have said, which is of course increasing diversification, not convergence to the optimum, but increasing diversification of ecologies. That's what Darwin was really all about. So this is what I say yes, but I want to make sure that you understand that what I define prediction as is the trajectory space. These are the 4 ways China could have gone under Deng Xiaoping. Not 5, not 8, not 12, but not 1 either. It wasn't predetermined. There were the 4. And prediction is to specify, okay, these are the 4. In other words, here's an autocatalytic network, and here's how it could tip. It could tip this way into a new one basin of traction, or multiple equilibria. It's not such a foreign idea. There are these multiple basins of attraction that systems are vulnerable to, and it's not predetermined. It really mattered what Deng Xiaoping did, to tip this thing, and then even then it went beyond his control, as Victor just said. I mean, it went way further than Deng wanted, but nonetheless, this was one of the 4 options. So, yeah, understanding the trajectory space, as long as you agree with that, then yes, I'm in favor of it as a culture model. Siggy.
You were talking about phenotypes, and you said, well, genes is not where the action is, but there's actually much more attention to the phenotype. I would agree with you. However, the question is, what is the phenotype in this case? So when you say in the short run, it's the actors that create the show. In the long run, the show creates the actors. Then is the actor now the phenotype? Because on the whole, I see that you go a little bit cavalierly over the what do we need to know about the individual as an actor that all these things happen. So if you take the phenotype very seriously, so now we go back to the micro-macro idea, and you said both are important. And of course, your story is mostly about
emphasizing
the network world, while the question is, what could we have some advantage from paying more attention to the phenotype that's involved in this, in terms of an actor that, with regard to the theory, that was the behavioral theory we have about the actor, is more stable than as a phenotype than as an actor. So that indeed over time actors change a great deal, but certain phenotypical parts of the actor change a lot slower, so that our theory about how human nature operates is a lot slower in changing than the actors in history are changing. And I see a lot of actors in history changing, but I don't see in your thing much attention to this micro part of course people then go from one domain to another to get an idea on how to solve it. Yet I of course don't see very much about let's say, what do we know about self-regulating mechanisms of human mechanisms with regard to being influenced from one sphere to another sphere. That I find, of course, a very strong part of your work, that there is that influence. But if you look at more at the nitty-gritty of that, the question is what's happening there, and could we learn something from paying more attention to the phenotype?
Good question. Tough question. Again, everything has to be predicated on time scale. So, things are utterly stable at the micro level on the short-term time scale. So, to enter into my game, we're talking about biographies, light course, at level 30-year for 30, 50-year time frames. And so, so empirically, question number one is how stable are we over 30, 50-year time frames, or are we, is the network interacting?
No, but that's what I think. How stable are we as actors? But how stable is human nature over these 50 years? And there, I think you would agree with me that there isn't much change in that.
Well, no, I would disagree with that. Sure. I mean, I would not disagree with, if you mean human nature of the biological infrastructure, then I certainly agree.
Also, in terms of the mental architecture
you have to break down actor into its components, and there are a variety of ways to do. The traditional way is, preferences, cognitive worldviews, values. These are the sort of typical elements of what makes an actor. So when you say stability, you're talking about stability of preferences, stability of cognitive worldviews, stability of values.
No, I'm not talking about content.
I don't know what human nature means.
Human nature would be the general mechanisms on how cognitions change, how your values might change under certain cognition. Of course,
like learning algorithms.
Learning algorithms, perceptual algorithms, changes in salience and all. Of course, the content will change over time.
Well, all I'm saying is, I really strongly disagree. I hate words like human nature, absolutely. It doesn't mean that I think everything changes in flux. There are slow changing things and fast changing things, and there are different time scales of change. But the idea of eternal non-change,
you didn't hear me say
no way.
Eternal. I said a much slower change.
There are slower changes
than in the other. That's what
Sure.
I'm saying, and that makes a difference with regard to the tools we have.
Sure. But I regard that as an empirical, not a theoretical question. It's up to us to collect the data and show what is slow change, fast change. All systems, even in the kinship, even the family, child rearing. This would be a classic slow changing sort of thing. It changed pretty quickly in our time. So everything changes, and they have different speeds and so forth. So I take your point seriously, but I turn it into an empirical question. Just measure. Sometime, even the most basic, slow-moving human nature things change pretty quickly. Sometimes.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.